Hotel, and I will be the moderator for this session today. Tech Chair, please start. Oh, yeah, always ahead of me. As mentioned by our SAA, please keep yourself muted. Feel free to send me your questions via chat, Moderator Ashvin, and I'll have the answered at the appropriate time. Keep it short, specific questions that deal with the topic discussed. During a section of the talk, if you have a burning desire or you don't understand what Kyle's teaching, or if the question seems pertinent and important, I'll interrupt Kyle and ask the question. And if the question can wait, then we'll just keep it for the Q&A at the end. Now for the reason you're here. Toastmasters tagline, where leaders are made. Do you realize this isn't bragging? And it isn't just a marketing phrase. Toastmasters can assist us in learning real-world, useful leadership skills, skills that are both valuable and marketable. During this special meeting, our guest speaker, Kyle Hall, will tell us his adventures in applying skills and learned in Toastmasters to the real world, changing his work, his career path, and his relationship within his community. So come learn about where the rubber meets the road. We'll walk away from this meeting understanding how to build valuable, marketable, and useful skills. Now, a bit about Kyle Hall. Kyle Hall comes to us with over 33 years of public speaking experience. He is a professional speaker and presentation coach who specializes in advanced speaking skills and helping people communicate more powerfully, effectively, and joyfully. Kyle is an avid competitor in speech contests and became the third place winner of the 2003 World Champion of Public Speaking and the current D32 Evaluation Champion. Mr. Hall is a past district director, has earned 2 distinguished Toastmaster awards, and taught scores of clubs on how to grow their membership. Kyle has a long history of combining being of service, leadership, and challenging himself to grow. So put your hands together, fellow Toastmasters, and please welcome Kyle Hall. Over to you, Mr. Kyle.
Thank you, Ashwin. I joined Golden Bell Toastmasters in April of 1994, that long ago, almost 30 years ago. And I joined it because I realized I was fairly poor at public speaking and I needed to get better at it. And it would serve me in everything I did. But I joined it to learn public speaking. That's why I joined. I did not join to learn anything about leadership. I did not care about leadership. I did not aspire to leadership. I joined the club. I started working the program 8 months into it. January rolls around, and the vice president of education in my club gets a promotion, has to leave, can't come to the club anymore. And so some of the senior members of the club came to me and said, Kyle, we'd like you to step in and fill the vice president of education term of office. We'd like you to do that for 6 months. And we'll train you and we'll support you. So, but it has to get done. Somebody has to do it. That's how the meetings get planned. Somebody has to do it. Okay, you'll train me and support me? Yep, okay, I'll do it. So I stepped in and I was VP of education for 6 months. And when that was over, they asked if I would allow myself to be nominated for president. They said, somebody's got to do it. We have to have a president to organize things, and we'll train you and we'll support you. And I went, well, okay. And they voted me in and I was president. I don't think I was a particularly good president. But after that year, I was another officer and so forth. And I stayed involved in the leadership. While this was going on, in the back of my head, I was like, I'm doing this leadership stuff. I'm VPE and president, and later on, sergeant at arms and VP of membership. I'm doing all this leadership stuff, but is any of it really valuable out in the real world? And I didn't know. Well, while all that was going on in Toastmasters, over here in another part of my life, I joined a 12-step group and I was working that program. And as a member of this group, I was asked to go and represent the group to something called an intergroup, where 30 12-step groups all send people, and so we can hash out how the groups are going to work together. So I was going to these intergroup meetings. And the guy who chaired the meeting, he was a sweetheart. He had a really big heart, lovely man, had, just really wanted to be of service. Not a great leader. The meetings were supposed to be an hour and a half long. They were usually 2 hours long, 2.5, sometimes 3 hours long. Sometimes the only reason the meetings ended was because people got up and left. It was painful. And after I'd been there for about 6 months, the gentleman who was leading the group, something happened in his life, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't lead it anymore. I have to, I can't come here. I can't lead this. So somebody else has to step up. And everyone's sitting there looking at each other. And a friend of mine who was there with me says, Kyle, you should lead it. I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, you should lead it. What are you talking about? It's like, well, at the end of every meeting, you're telling me, well, he should have done this. He should have done that. He should have, you should have done things this way. It's like, put your money where your mouth is. Step up and lead it. Oh. What I realized was the reason I was saying no was I was afraid. I'd never chaired a meeting before. I mean, I chaired little groups, informal groups of officers as a president, but I'd never chaired a 30-person meeting before. I was afraid. Well, I'd learned in my life that fear is my compass pointing me to the thing I have to go do. Oh, I volunteered. I stepped up. I led that group. Now, everything I did for that group were things I learned in Toastmasters. The other gentleman had really loose agendas, like, hey, we're going to talk about the conference, just the conference. That doesn't tell you what you're going to talk about. And so my agenda items were not loose. We're going to talk about when will the next conference be? Very specific. I published the agendas in advance so people could see what we were going to talk about. We took useful notes and then we published them a couple of days after the meeting. Typically what they've done in the past is, well, they took notes and they published them the day before the next meeting, which nobody had a time to look at, and they showed up at the meeting and nobody had looked at them. We took notes. We published them well in advance. We published the agenda in advance. We had the meeting, and the meetings went from 2.5 hours down to 2 hours, down to an hour and a half, and they weren't painful. Now, one of the other things I had to do as a chair is I had to keep people on subject because, of course, people have a tendency, we're talking about this, and I'm going to go down this rat hole. Oh, no, we're not talking about that. Come back out here. We're only talking about this. And that's kind of a facilitation technique, which, by the way, is one of the things Toastmasters teaches is facilitation. So everything I was using in there to keep the meeting on time, to make it run efficiently, were Toastmaster skills. And I had learned a little bit. I'd seen Robert's Rules of Order being used in the club. We use them in the club sometimes. We only, most of the time the officers were talking, we didn't use them, but okay, we had a decision to make. Now we'll pull out Robert's Rules of Order, make a motion, get a second, discuss it, vote. I had to use that Robert's Rules of Order. And for a long time, it felt like a artificially constrained way of doing things, and I didn't appreciate them. Now I'm going to switch over to another organization. A few years later, I'm a member of a Lions Club, and I had been asked to be on the board of the Lions Club. And after I was there for a couple of years, I was the president of the board of the Lions Club. Still using Robert's Rules of Order, still thinking them of as an artificial constraint that didn't really serve that much purpose. But we had a problem. The Lions Club, this particular Lions Club, had an endowment. We had money, and we gave the interest from that endowment was given out to graduating high school seniors every year to help them go to college. And we had a committee and a process, and the committee went through a process of evaluating the high school seniors and assigning the money. And it was a good process because a bunch of us had come up with that process and developed it, and it was robust, and it helped eliminate favoritism and bias and things like that. It was a good process. But we had one member of the group, of the club, who had been in that club longer than almost everybody else, and he thought his voice should be heard more. And he always thought he knew who should get the money. So every year, when the committee time came and the committee came back with their report, he would stand there and argue that, no, you guys got it wrong. Bob's kid shouldn't get that money. Harold's kid should get that money. Susan's kid should get this much money. And it became a big arguing, would last for half an hour, 45 minutes. And I'm like, I can't have that. I'm trying to run an efficient meeting. I can't have that. How can I stop this from happening? And I realized Robert's Rules of Order gave me the tool I needed. I hadn't realized it, but it's like, I can use this. So I was ready. The meeting came, the committee gave their report. We're going to give these 4 seniors this much money. That's our recommendation. Great. As chair, I said, okay, we have a motion from the committee. It doesn't need a second. And the gentleman in question stands up. Yeah, I don't think that's right, but we should give. I said, stop. Do you have a motion? Oh, well, yeah. We should give person A this much money, person B this much money, person C this much money, person C this much money, person E this much money. That's my motion. Okay, did you capture that motion? Great. Does the motion have a second? Silence. Hey, thank you for your motion, but it dies for lack of a second. Let's move on. And the guy was like, and he didn't know what to do. It was perfect. And that's when I realized Robert's Rules of Order is self-defense for the leader. It's worth learning because it's self-defense for the leader. It's not an artificial constraint. It's a blessing for when stuff gets rough in a meeting. And I developed a real appreciation for that skill. Now, I am by no means a Robert's Rules of Order expert. There are people who are experts. I know the basics and I use them. But all those things I was doing in being of service to the intergroup, being of service to the Alliance group, all of them were using skills I learned in Toastmasters. Now, when I had been an officer, I'd been in my club for a couple of years, and some of my club members started moving up in district leadership. And one of them was a conference chair, and she said, "Kyle, come and help me help me with this conference." Well, I like this lady. She was one of my mentors. She wasn't asking me to chair a group. She was asking me just to be on a group. Okay, I'll be on the education committee. Okay, and I worked that. And then the next year they said, "Hey, come and help. But this time we'd like you to chair the education committee." Oh, okay. And the following year, "Hey, we'd like you to come and help. We'd like you to be the conference chair." That's scary, but fear is the pointer to the thing I have to go do. So I did it. And of course, I had support. I had people around me who had done it before, my friends who had done it before. So I had people to ask. And I got through it. It was a successful conference. Boy, did this stand me in good stead when I was asked to do things outside of Toastmasters. Going back to the Lions Club, my wife and I joined the club. Their single biggest fundraiser every year is a salmon barbecue. They feed something like 700 people salmon, and they raise enough money to help fund that endowment I mentioned, plus do some other stuff. And somebody has to organize it. Well, after my wife and I had been in the group for a couple of months, we volunteered to co-organize it. And the club didn't know what hit them because, I walked in with all that conference planning experience. It's like, okay, let's make a budget. Let's make a timeline. Let's form some subcommittees and figure out who's doing what. And all the organizational skills that I had been taught, I then took out into the real world, into that being of service club world. One of the things that Toastmasters teaches us is how to create a team, and then how to motivate that team. Of course, motivating them is part of creating them, but I mean, how to create a team. For instance, not to make, I want to say this positively, not negatively. When you're creating your team, you want to invite people who have the skills you need, as opposed to inviting your friends who may or may not have the skills you need. And you want to invite people that you can have conversations with about how things are going to work, as opposed to, let's say, a friend who's going to expect that you're going to, be nice to them all the time. We are nice, but that doesn't mean we sometimes we have to have a tough conversation. And if it's the person you can't have a tough conversation with, you don't want them on your team. So we have to make those types of choices. One of the things I learned communicating about Toastmaster conferences is over communicate. If in doubt, communicate. Let people know what's going on. Let people know what their decisions are. Let people know what their timelines are. Over communicate. Even if somebody says you're sending me too many emails, that's a worse problem than you're not telling me enough. I don't know what's going on. So over communicate. And of course, we learn about marketing and public relations. How do you market a conference? Even if you're planning a conference, every district has a conference every year. It is a mistake to think that because the conference is planned, people are going to come. There are a few people who will show up at a conference anyway. There are a few, always. But if you really want to have a bang-up conference, you need to market it to your members and sell its value and sell its fun. And you need to do that. And some groups forget that. And the same is true for, Lions and salmon barbecues. Every year Lions has a salmon barbecue, but that doesn't mean we don't have to market it. Yeah, a few of the people are going to show up no matter what, whether we set up the tent or not, whether we're barbecuing salmon or not, they're going to show up in the parking lot. But most of the time we have to sell it. We have to market it. And Toastmasters teaches us these things. Now, everything I've talked about thus far in Toastmasters, in the 12-step intergroup, in Lions, service clubs, all of that, none of that is professional. It is being of service to your community. And these skills are terribly, terribly valuable out in our community. While I was doing all of that, I'm a computer guy. I worked for a computer company. When I started Toastmasters, I gave technical presentations a couple of times, 12 times a year or so, which is why I needed to become a better speaker. But I mostly did tech support. That was most of my job, tech support. When I started in Toastmasters and I started becoming a better communicator, within the company I worked for, I started changing. I moved up into a consulting role. So now I was doing more consulting, and I was going out and helping with sales support. So I was out in front of brand new customers who needed to be talked to. I was doing more and more communicating and less of the technical work. And that was going on. And then my company downsized and I got laid off. My wife was in medical school. We were hemorrhaging money. I needed a job. A friend of mine who had been a salesperson at the company that had just laid me off, he was working for a small consulting firm. He heard I was laid off, and they needed one of the technical skills I had. So they hired me. They hired me for this small technical skill. And I went out on this project for 6 or 8 weeks, worked it, finished it. Great. This client is done. And now suddenly they're like, we don't need this guy anymore. We don't need that technical skill. What do we do with this guy? So Joe, my friend, came to me and said, Kyle, we don't need your technical skill, but you do this Toastmaster thing, right? You do this Toastmaster leadership thing, right? And I went, yeah. It's like, well, we need a project manager. We got a project and it's a little behind, and we need a project manager. Would you like to step up and be a project manager? Well, I needed the job, and it was a leadership role. And I developed a little bit of confidence in my ability to lead. I never had any training in project management, none at all. I went, okay, I'll try. So Joe brought me in to a meeting with the client. Now the client is angry. And he looks at Joe and he goes, this is the third project manager you brought in here in 3 weeks. If I have a problem with my project, who do I talk to? Well, I knew the answer to that. I knew the answer to that from Toastmasters. If I'm the manager, I'm the person in charge. I said, me, you talk to me. Well, that was apparently the right answer. I was moved in to the project, working for the client with a small team. The team was angry. And the project was a little bit behind. And I have to admit, there was a moment of panic. Like, what the heck do I do? I got an angry team, an angry client. I pulled out the project plan that one of the previous project managers had left behind, and it made no sense. No sense whatsoever. You know, I looked at it, couldn't understand it, showed it to the project team. Can you guys explain this to me? They're like, no, we didn't have any part in making that up. We don't understand it. I had a moment of panic, but it's like, I know how to do this. I know how to do this. So throw out if you have an agenda that doesn't make sense, throw it out and make one that makes sense. I had a project plan that didn't make sense. I threw it out, sat down with the group, and we remade the project plan. They were involved with me. I facilitated. We discussed it. We made up the project plan and the timeline. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. Everyone knows what the steps are. Everyone understands what the tasks are. Yup. Okay. And then I get the hell out of their way and let them work. And my whole role for that team was helping them identify roadblocks that were ahead of them and moving those roadblocks out of the way, and over communicating, making sure everybody knew what was going on. All of those are Toastmaster skills. And the project came in on time, well, a week late, but on budget, and the customer was happy and the team was happy. And we moved on to do more work for that client. The project management, I spent the next 9 years doing software project management for first this consulting company and then another one. And almost everything I did, well, actually, everything I did was skills based on Toastmasters. I went into a small, well, not so small, I went into a very large Northwest aerospace company that I will not name as a consultant. And again, project stalled. Gee, can you get it going? I started talking to the people involved in the project team. Why is this stalled? What's going on? And the teams were fighting. What are you fighting about? Oh, well, they're fighting about, what I realized is they're fighting over the scope of the project. Well, one of the most fundamental things in any project and anything you're doing is defining the scope of it. It took me about a week to figure out what the problem was. It took me another 3 weeks to get onto the agendas to get the two executive sponsors in a room together. And when they're in a room together, I'm like, this is the scope of the project as written. Is that correct? They both go, yes. Does this scope, which is to replace one computer system with another, that was the scope of that was as written. Does the scope include process improvement? And one said yes, and the other said no. And that was the problem. One group of people were given marching orders to improve the process while they made the change, and the other group of people were given the orders, don't improve the process, just make the change. And so everybody underneath had been fighting about it. And as soon as we clarify that clarity of communication, using the same words and meaning different things, once we discovered that they were using the same words and meaning different things, we could clarify the communication, we could clarify the marching orders, the project started moving. It was like the floodgates had been opened and things moved forward. All of that is just communication, which is what we teach. I'm sure you guys have heard about, I know they teach this in some consulting theories, but I think we've also talked about it in Toastmasters. If there's a problem, look for the problem with the process, not a person. So blame the process, not the person. Look for the problem in the process and fix it. Hopefully you've heard that. I know I've heard that in Toastmasters meetings, because if we're having a difficulty, usually it's a problem with the process, often with training. Hey, we didn't train somebody, we didn't train, let's say, the webmaster how to go onto a free Toast and sign up the new members. No wonder they're not getting signed up, so that they can't be assigned to roles and agenda. Well, as soon as you train them, the problem, that block gets out of the way and things get done. We don't blame the webmaster, we train them. Again, another Toastmaster skill. I'm going to tell you one of the things that have helped me be successful in any role I've been in. And this is particularly true for my project management role, but it's helped me in Lions, it helped me in working in the intergroup, it's helped me, and I learned it in Toastmasters. Are you willing to take your ego and put it aside and ask the dumb question in front of the group? How many times have you sat there in a group and you're like, I really want to know this. I don't understand what's going on, but I don't want to look like a fool. I won't ask the question because I don't want to be humiliated. Everybody else knows what's going on, but I won't ask the question because I don't want to look like the only person here who doesn't. I have learned to put those thoughts aside and ask the dumb question. And when I do that, almost inevitably, there's 10 other people in the room who have the same question. Almost inevitably, it's just a communication issue. Oh, we didn't tell you that? Oh, here, let me explain that. Oh, you don't know what the vocabulary is? I actually had this happen just last week. I'm part of a group here in Squim, and we're doing a lessons learned process. We had an event, we're doing a lessons learned, and somebody's like, well, you're gonna do the after action report. Oh, well, I've already scheduled that. No, you've scheduled the debriefing. What's the difference? Well, they have a process. There's a debriefing, and then there's an after action report. Okay, fine. You want to call them different things? You want two different things done? Okay, fine. It's just a communication issue. They assume you understand what they're talking about. But if you're willing to ask the dumb question, put your ego aside and ask the dumb question, even in public, even out in front of the group, wow, what a powerful capability that is, because it gets the whole group talking. And it gets the things people don't understand out in front of the group. Now, along my road as a project manager, I was asked to be a first line manager, basically managing a couple of people, mentoring them, giving them their performance evaluations and so forth. And I was managing a lovely young woman named Christine, who was a database expert. And I had to give her an evaluation. It was due in a couple of months. Well, a month went by, I hadn't done anything. 2 months went by, I hadn't done anything. Her evaluation's a month away and I haven't done anything. I'm like, why aren't I doing anything? Why aren't I doing anything? I don't understand why I'm resisting. Oh, it's fear. It's fear. I've never done a personal evaluation. It's fear. And no one taught me how to do it. I've never done one before. How do I do this? Well, okay, well, as soon as I recognize it's fear, I can push through the fear. What can I do? Well, I know how to evaluate speeches. Toastmasters taught me that. What did you do well? What could you do to make it even better? What if I apply the same thing to personnel evaluations? I did that. What was Christina doing in her job that made this work well for the team? What could she do better to make it work better for the team? And then I say, what was the absolute best thing she was doing for the end? It worked beautifully. Toastmaster evaluation techniques work wonders for personnel evaluations. I had to, at one point, fire somebody from a project. I talked to him about what he was doing well for the team, what he couldn't do for the team, and we needed him to go learn, and how much we appreciated his work. And the firing process was actually relatively pleasant. I mean, he walked out thanking me for the feedback so that he could go and improve and get better at it. The evaluation skills alone is really powerful material. If you are employed in an organization, now I've gone from working in a monstrously large organization, about 200,000 people, down to working for a consulting company that was a couple thousand people across the country, down to a really local consulting company that was like 100 people in Seattle. And now I'm an entrepreneur. So I've gotten smaller and smaller and smaller over time. But one of the things you realize in Toastmasters leadership, hopefully you realize it in Toastmasters leadership, and you also realize it as you move up, as you get higher and higher roles in corporations, is you really don't have any power. Hey, I've got this title. Yeah, but that doesn't really give you any power, because if you try to tell people what to do, they'll go, no, I'm leaving. This happens in volunteer organizations. It also happens in jobs. I mean, in companies. Yeah, you might be able to hold somebody's salary over their head, but that only lasts so long. And that's if you hold their salary over their head, it's an immediate adversarial relationship. So you can't order people. So how do you influence people? Well, that's one of the things we learn. Area director is, when you're an area director, the first role outside the club in Toastmasters, that's all about influence. How do you influence a club without having any power? That's what that role's about, influencing a club without having any power. Division director, now you're one level removed from the club. How do you influence clubs through area directors without having any power? Club growth director, program quality director, district director, those things are even more removed. How do you influence the whole district of clubs without really having any power? Those are powerful lessons to learn. And I'm going to talk about when I first wrote this talk, I did not have the experience in the program quality, the club growth director, program quality director, district director's roles. So I've added that section. But I want to talk about one other thing before I move on. Toastmasters taught me a skill I didn't understand the value of until I was in the middle of a group where there were some very politically minded people. And the skill Toastmasters taught me is, if you're going to send out a communication, make sure it's truthful and make sure you send the same thing to everybody. Now, when I say truthful, these are the facts. Not this is what I think is going to happen. This is what might happen. These are the facts. So when Pathways was coming out, I didn't try to tell people what Pathways is going to be like. I didn't know what Pathways is going to be like. I just said, Pathways is coming out. Here's the timeline. We will introduce it to you when we can. We'll show you what it looks like when we can. Just the facts, and everyone gets everything. It turns out that when you communicate only truth, and you communicate the same thing to everybody, you can create a zone where it's really hard for politics to go on. And that zone will be operating around you. See, most people, when they start playing office politics or organizational politics, it's all about secrets and knowledge. I know this and you don't, or they know this and whatnot. Well, if you create an environment where if you know it and it's a fact and you share it, and you share it equally with everybody, nobody, you're not sending it to one person and not another, politics has a hard time working near you. I'm not saying there isn't somebody out there skilled enough to get around that, but it helps. Now, since I first wrote this talk, I have gone up through the trio, through the three ladders: club growth director, program quality director, district director. And as I mentioned, this is further removed from the club, but yet it's a very powerful role without having any power. Powerful in that you can influence strongly. You can influence strongly, and you have a voice that people might listen to if you use it. But you can't tell anybody what to do because they don't have to listen to you. When I was asked to step up to be club growth director, and I want to mention this because it's going to be important in a few minutes. I had no aspirations to ever be district director. I was in District 2 for years. I thought about it, but I was more concerned with becoming a better speaker and competing, and that was one of my areas of interest. I didn't feel any drive to work my way up through the club growth director, program quality director, district director. I moved over here to District 32. Still did not have any drive to do that. But a man I respect, past international director Stephen Bard, came up and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "It's time." And I went, "What?" "When it's time." He said, "The district needs you. We need somebody to step up and run for club growth director. And I think it should be you." Now, his invitation to do that was not sufficient, but it got me thinking about it. And I started talking with the other past district directors I knew and the other people in the district. And I started talking about it and thinking about it. And I prayed about it. And I journaled about it. And I meditated on it. And I decided finally to step up and go through that ladder. And I have to agree with what my friend Bruce Meeker, past district director, told me. He said, going up through that ladder, club growth director, program quality director, district director, immediate past district director, is like a poor man's MBA. Doesn't cost as much as going to a college and getting an MBA, but you're learning a lot of the same things. You're learning marketing, you're learning PR, you're learning how to influence at a very high level. You're learning how powerful it is just to be the person gathering the people together to be on the team. You don't even have to lead the team, just gathering the people together to be on the team and then turning the team loose on a problem. That's the level at which you're working. And I mean, as a district director, the level at which you're working is where is the district putting its attention? Where is the district putting its money? There's a lot of ways to influence these things, and there's a lot of subtlety to how it's done. And you can start to learn that going through those three roles. And those roles, it's like being a manager in a medium-sized enterprise. Club growth director, program quality director, district director. If you wanted to manage a 1,000-person company, it's the same sorts of skills. Now, I have not been an international director, but considering the international directors I've talked to, I think being an international director would be a lot like being on the board of directors of a major enterprise. Toastmasters is a 350,000 person enterprise across 144 countries. And there's 16 people or 18 people on the board of directors. And they form committees and they do work. That's how board of directors work. So if you wanted that type of experience and you want it for free, join, work your way up to being on the board of directors for Toastmasters International. These are what we've talked about is all the things you can learn by taking on leadership roles. And I'm glazing the surface of the skills I've learned and the subtleties involved, but trying to give you an appreciation for all the things we can learn by taking on leadership roles within Toastmasters, because they can teach us skills that are useful out in real life, that are valuable out in real life, and that are marketable, where you can sell this skill to a company or to a client and help support yourself using those skills. Now, let's talk. I had originally planned to do some breakout rooms, but we're not going to do that. So I'm going to ask, first of all, before we move into breakouts, does anybody have any bursting questions they want me to address?
Hi, Kyle. Yes, we have a few questions in the chat room. I would love to tell you. Do you believe that everybody can be trained as a leader everywhere, all the time?
Interesting question. Can everyone be trained as a leader all the time? I want to say, I have to say yes and no. For instance, learning public speaking, it's a skill. It can be taught. Learning to be humorous, it's a skill. It can be taught. Leadership is a skill. It can be taught. With that being said, some people have a little bit more of a natural gift with it than others. I mean, it's like music. Some people have a sense of rhythm, some people don't. Occasionally you run across somebody with no sense of rhythm and no sense of tone, and they just can't learn music, but that's really rare. I think occasionally you might run across somebody who has no sense of humor and couldn't learn to be humorous. You know, I'm still not convinced you couldn't teach that person to be funny. They would have to adapt it to their style. Occasionally you may run across a person who has a hard time with public speaking. I still think they could learn it, but it's going to be a stiffer uphill climb. Now, I will confess that when I was thrown into leadership situations, once I identified and moved past my own fear, which is part of the process, I have a certain instinct for how to behave. And part of it's just me. Because I learned a long time ago to stand up in front of the group and go and ask the dumb question. I do not stand up in front of the group and try to convince them that I'm the great leader. I stand up in front of the group and go, okay, we've got this problem. This project isn't moving. I'm not sure how to fix it. Let's talk about it and see if we can figure it out together. And I'm very facilitative in that leadership style. That leadership style works for me. I think I'm straying off of your question. Can anyone learn it? I think that everyone can. Some people, it's going to be tougher or a longer road than others.
I agree. I think they have to have a growth mindset. I think if they have that fixed mindset, they won't be able to learn or do anything. And my question to you, Kyle, is when did the rubber meet the road for you? Was it when Robert's rule came into the play, or when did you realize that, hey, this is working? This is what I could use.
I think I first started to realize that this stuff was valuable when I was chairing that intergroup committee. And I started chairing it. I started publishing the agenda in advance. I started making my agendas really clear, with very specific questions as to what we're answering. And when the meetings went from 2.5 hours down to an hour and a half, the membership started expressing such gratitude. It was like, oh, wow, okay. So one, they're validating that I'm doing a good thing, and they really appreciate it. And this is just stuff I learned being a Toastmaster, planning a meeting, or being a president, planning an executive meeting. And it works. It works, and it works out in the real world. And people really appreciate it when you can, run a tight committee meeting.
I agree with you, Kyle. I mean, Toastmasters, it's so much more than just speaking. I mean, that's what I thought. But I mean, for you, it learned like project manager, you're like everywhere, and you could take these skills and use them, right? I mean, how to control the meeting, how to, for the biggest thing for me was your influence without power. That's such a great phrase. I mean, how do you influence without power? You have to have power to influence, right? It's almost the other way around.
So let me actually address, there's an implied question there. How do you influence without power?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to try to describe that as actually, I might talk about being district director, but let's talk about being area director. Your first role outside the club. You have to go visit your club twice a year. And that's to basically evaluate them and report back. Well, guess what? That's not enough. If you want to actually influence your club, if you want to be a positive influence in the club, you need to go visit them several times. The first visit should just be, hey, I'm here to introduce myself. Every time you go, you should be calling them in advance saying, hey, I'm coming. Is there something you'd like me to do? That club will probably say, hey, we'd like you to speak. Well, when they ask you to speak, don't come in and talk about your great aunt Adelaide and how she loves playing the organ or what's going on at work. If they're going to ask you to speak, you say, okay, I'll speak. What's a challenge going on in your club? And now speak on that challenge. And have something in your hip pocket in case they say we don't have a challenge. Have something related. One of my friends Mike Marion was a area director. He had a talk in his pocket on lectern etiquette. It turned out to be the most popular talk he gave. He would say, "Hey, I'm coming to visit your club," and they'd say, and he'd ask him, "What do you want me to do?" "Oh, we'd like you to speak." "What do you want me to speak on?" "Oh, I don't know." "Well, how about this?" And he'd give him a list of 3 or 4 things. One of them was lectern etiquette. Almost inevitably, they asked for lectern etiquette because nobody understands the etiquette of why you stand there and wait for somebody to come up and shake hands and whatnot, and so forth. As an area director, every time you visit a meeting, you influence by the example you set, by the words you speak, by the questions you ask. When you're talking to the officers afterwards, you influence by the questions you ask and the offers of help that you make. Those are the ways you influence without having any power.
And it's the energy you bring to the meetings too, right? I mean,
Yep.
how do you present yourself and always be ready? I mean, I was an area director and a division director, and I always had a speech ready. So if they ever say, "Hey, we don't have a speaker," I'll speak.
Yep.
Right? Yeah,
Yep.
be enthusiastic. Show them the way. So I agree with that.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Next question was, Elon Musk and Steve Jobs are bullies, but accomplish a lot of things. Are they good leaders by your concept and standard?
Um,
Oh, a sigh.
so I was in a small company, a small internet startup company, and the CEO. Fortunately, I did not work directly for the CEO. I worked for the chief technical officer, but the CEO was a project manager from a military background who believed he believed that when the project got started, he would tell you what to do and you would do it, and if you didn't do it to his satisfaction, he would scream at you. And I have to admit, so the technical team would walk by the conference room while he was screaming at the salespeople because they weren't making their sales numbers. Didn't give him any credibility. That's being a bully. And now I don't know. I honestly don't know enough about Steve Jobs and how he treated his employees. From what little I've seen of Elon Musk, I would say no, he's not a very good leader. Being rich doesn't necessarily make you a good leader. Did Elon Musk become wealthy because he was smart or a good leader, or was he just in the right place at the right time? I'm not wise enough to tell you that. I will tell you, I was interviewed by a company that wanted me to come in as a project manager. And they said, "We have a project team. They're working on this project. We need them to make this deadline. We don't care if they are alive when the project is done. We want to make this deadline." They didn't say alive. "We don't care if they're still working for us when the project is done. We want them to make this deadline." And I said, "This is not the job for me. No, it's not the job for me because that's not the type of leader I am. I'm a facilitative leader and a nurturer. If you want this team to get the job done and be ready to move on to the next job when it's done, I'm your man. But if you just want to beat them with a stick until they get the work done, that's not me."
I agree, Kyle. I mean, bullies, I mean, they'll just yell. But I like the leaders that show value and are in it. They get their hands wet, right?
Mhm.
Even though they're yelling, they're in there in the factory or wherever it is. They're getting their hands wet and showing you the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't ask anyone to do something you wouldn't be willing to do yourself.
Exactly. Bingo. Yeah. Next question is, how do you deal with, I would say, how do you deal with negative people in meetings?
Um,
Do you employ
I
the
want to
Robert's
take.
rule?
I was thinking of a real life example. So remember, I told you my first project management example.
Mhm.
I went into this group. We were building a new system for a bunch of city employees. This was the project that was behind. I was the project manager. The customer was angry. The client was angry. The end users were angry. So one of the things we did when I was building the project plan with the team, they said, we need to sit down with the end users. We need time with them to walk through how they use the system so that we make sure we build something they can use and that will do the job they want and do it better than the system they currently have. Okay, I will schedule time with the end users. I went and talked to the representative of the end users, and I got an earful. Angry. Well, I sat there and I let him vent at me for 20 minutes. And after that, I said, okay, so can we schedule this time? Yes. Okay, we scheduled it. Now I went back to the end users. I said, look, the end users are angry. So we've scheduled a 3-hour meeting, the first 45 minutes of which expect to get no work done. The first 45 minutes is you ask them what they hate about their current system and let them vent at you, and let them vent and let them vent and let them vent and keep poking and let them vent until they're tired of venting. And when they're showing signs of running out of things to vent about, now it's time to start moving. Okay, what can we do to make this better? How could we fix this? And you let them get that negative energy out. And I've done that. I've done that with one-on-one interviews. I went in to ask a guy I was working with on a project, and I said, you know, what's going on? And he turned around and it was like, ask a question. Well, okay, I asked what's going on. You're angry. Tell me about that. Why are you angry? Get him talking, get him venting, let him get that energy out. And it turns out it's not about you. The anger is not about you. It's about something else. And when they finally feel listened to, boy, do they appreciate that. You heard me. You paraphrase back to them. Hey, I understand you're angry because of this and this and this. I understand your frustration. Let's talk about how we can fix that. You paraphrase back to people. You let them know they've been heard, and then they are finally ready to move on to solution.
Thank you, Kyle. Hey, Kyle, we have probably like around 15 minutes left. Do you want to do the group discussion now?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had 3 different topics that I had hoped to send in breakout rooms, but I think we're just going to deal with one. We're going to deal with a third topic, and I'm going to share my screen.
Kyle, should I put the group exercise document in the chat for you?
No, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. I'm going to share my screen. And this is the question we're going to talk about. When you think about yourself stepping up to a leadership role, what is your self-talk? And then what moves you into action? How do you need to be told, asked, invited to step up to a leadership role? And now let me preface this with a story. A few years ago, I met a man named John Zvilovic up here in District 32. I met him when I was an area director. He was at an event, just helping out. The next year, when I was division director, he was an area director. Again, I would see him at Toastmaster events. He and I became friends. We hit it off immediately. We really enjoyed each other, and I enjoyed his enthusiasm, his energy, his sense of service, his positivity. And he went up through division director before he said that's enough. I was talking with my friend Mary Morrison. Now, Mary Morrison knew John longer than me. And as a matter of fact, she met John before he was an area director. And she just went up to him and said to him, you know, John, I really enjoy the positivity and the energy you bring to the meeting you're at, because he was just helping out. And she said, have you thought about, stepping up to be area director? And his response was, no, I'm not a leader. Well, he was going to meetings outside of his club. He was going to district events, area events, and helping out and volunteering and setting up chairs and taking down chairs or setting up the coffee machine, whatever. And just helping out and bringing energy and enthusiasm. But yet his self-talk was, I'm not a leader. Now, he went on and he agreed to become an area director. He agreed to become a division director. He didn't want to go any higher up the chain. He had other things in his life that were more important. He worked with youth that were in trouble. He did that as part of his job. Yet his internal talk was, I'm not a leader. And I'm sitting here going, this guy certainly is a leader. He's chosen the area of his life in which he wants to lead, in which he wants to be of service. He is being of service every day. There are people's lives he is changing, and yet his internal self-talk is, I'm not a leader. Now, John died a couple of years ago. Two of his favorite hobbies are hiking and photography, and he was hiking around Mount Rainier and taking photographs, and he fell into a ravine and died. And this man, who didn't see himself as a leader, District 32 now has a John Villasvik Award, which they give to somebody for outstanding service to the district. So he is being honored for his leadership, and yet he never saw himself as a leader. So our self-talk will often hold us back. So when somebody invites you to step up to a leadership role, being a club officer, being an area director, being, stepping up to leading a committee in your church, to getting involved in your city. When somebody asks you, what's your self-talk? And Bud Everett's self-talk, can I do this? Do I have the time? Will I get support, mentor? So those very realistic questions to ask. Those are good questions to ask. The first thing what I want you to realize is, what do you think about yourself as a leader? A lot of us think, no, I'm not a leader. We have this image of leaders as something big and outside ourselves, something like General Patton or MacArthur or Julius Caesar. And people with huge egos and big hats. That's not necessarily a leader. Often leaders are quiet. And some of the best leaders are just they listen and they talk and they facilitate. So let's would anyone like to share their thoughts on what comes up for them with their self-talk?
Absolutely, Kyle. Derek has raised his hand.
Okay, Derek. Oh, I think he's got his hand up because he's the timer.
Yeah.
That keeps him in the upper right corner.
Derek, do you have a question?
No, I think his hand is up because he's the timer.
Okay. Well, I have a question if no one else has a question.
Okay.
You're right. My self-talk is, I say yes first, and then I'm like, oh my goodness, what did I do? The panic sets in later, not before.
Right.
Yeah.
My career has been one of saying yes and then figuring it out. I like to think of it as jumping into the deep end and learning to swim. Now, that metaphor may be like, oh, that's a bad metaphor, but that's kind of, I have said yes to things and then I jump in and figure it out. And I've done it enough now that I have huge confidence that when I jump in over my head, I can figure it out. Here's the next question. What moves you into action? How do you need to be told, asked, invited to step up to a leadership role? I mentioned.
I'm sorry, Kyle. I apologize for interrupting, but I think Teresa has a question.
Okay. Go ahead, Teresa.
I don't know if you wanted to move to the next question, but I did want to share my self-talk.
Oh, please do.
Yeah. For me, hang on.
Yep.
This should be better.
Yep.
Thank you. So for me, I've been consistently saying to myself that there's probably someone else way better suited than me. And also I think I might be too young with the corresponding crew, because I'm usually the youngest in the room. And so I just never feel qualified, even though maybe people encourage me or would like me to or ask me to. Even though I do have a small track record of doing well, it's the self-talk never goes away. I always feel like, someone else could have done all that way better. Someone with more experience or something. Yeah.
And I appreciate you sharing your self-talk. There's a part of me that wants to argue with you that your self-talk is wrong, but I'm not going to do that because your self-talk is your self-talk. There's another part of me that wants to say, whether your self-talk is true or not isn't as important as the fact that you can recognize when it's happening and you can choose whether or not to listen to it. So I know that when I get asked, especially if somebody surprises me with a, will you step up to do something? There's a part of me that's like, either there's a little voice inside that says you can't do it. Now I've learned over time that voice is usually, that's a voice that's trying to protect me. It's trying to stop me from taking a risk. On the other hand, I've learned from experience, I usually can do it if I have the time. The other voice that comes up is, yeah, but you're too busy. You don't have time. Well, again, that's trying to protect me from over committing myself. And like Bud put some questions in there, I can come back and ask some questions. Okay, you want me to do this? When's it going to get done? Do I actually have time to do it? How important is it in the greater scheme of things compared to the other stuff I'm working on? Because if it's, and how much time is it going to take? If it's going to take a lot of time, but it's not very important, why should I do this?
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Kyle.
Okay. Yeah. The self-talk has value, but let's not let it rule us. That's what I'm trying to say.
And remember, you have nothing to lose, but everything to gain. So,
yeah.
Kyle, you want to go up on your second question?
Well, Arnie, I think Arnie is raising his hand. Arnie, do you have something you want to say?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Kyle. And the Harvard Business Review said that there's no such thing as universal leadership. It's highly personal, highly subjective, idiosyncratic. Your leadership is different from Mr. Patel or Mr. Munidar or Mr. Shelby or Elliot Mao. It's very, very personal. So prescribing principles and doctrine is sometimes not comfortable. What do you say?
So I appreciate the comment, and if I understand what you're saying, it's that leadership is subjective not only to each person but also to cultures.
Right.
People will see it differently. Cultures will see it differently. That would be an interesting. A group I'm a part of is going to be doing storytelling, cultural differences in storytelling, and cultural differences in humor. But I'd be interested to see a discussion of cultural differences in leadership. That might be an interesting discussion. So here's the next thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to share my screen just for a second, just so you can see the question. It's this part right here. What moves you into action? How do you need to be asked, invited, or told so that you'll step up? Now, you recall I mentioned past international director tapped me on the shoulder and said, the district needs you. It's time you stepped up. And that wasn't sufficient, but it kicked the ball, it kicked off the process. It got the ball rolling for me. And part of that was necessary for that particular leadership role, because I had no desire to go do that leadership role. I had to be told I was needed. Years ago, I had a district director try to convince me to be an area director. And he was trying to sell it to me. Hey, you need to be an area director. You want to become a professional speaker. You need to be an area director to get a DTM, and having a DTM is important for professional speakers. No, it's not. I can tell you right now, nobody in the professional speaking world cares at all whether you're a DTM or not. And I knew that then, so I knew he was trying to sell me, and I was not sold. However, there were another reason. There were people above in the leadership that said, we got some problems going on, and you can help us solve them if you get involved. And I chose to get involved. So for me, I need to know there's a need. Otherwise, I'm probably not going to step up, because I have enough other things that I'm working on my own. How do you need to be asked? It's important that you recognize that. So think about a leadership role you have had and how you were asked to participate in it, and share that if you would.
Thank you, Kyle. Kyle, we have a little more time than needed, so if you could go back to the first question on your workshop, that'll be great.
we will, but let's deal with this question
right
now, seeing as we're here.
Okay.
So to pick a leadership role that you've played in the past. How are you asked, told, influenced to take that leadership role? And is that how you need to be asked? And Teresa says, usually I struggle with just saying no. Yeah. Some of us, learning to say no, it can be a tough one. Go ahead, Doris.
Myself, I hate to have people tell me what I need to do or what I should do, so it would be nice if they would tell me how useful or beneficial that role is to me, or how to make me curious or feel that I do want to have that role for myself, for my growth. But definitely not that I should do or I need to do.
Okay. It's important that you recognize that. And if somebody comes at you and says, hey, this is something you should do, you can turn it around on them by saying, well, how would that be a benefit to me? Is it Eliate or Elliot?
Yes, it's Elliot. Hi, Kyle. Hi,
Elliot.
everybody.
Go ahead.
I
Elliot.
have been on the giving end and the receiving end of what motivates me to do things. So I remember those 4 little words, which I would use over and over again. And those 4 words were, I believe in you. The first time someone said that to me, of course I had those doubts. Of course I had those hesitations, but wow, I believe in you. I have used that to get so many people to step up to so many, especially leadership roles. And this is something I wanted to share.
Okay, thank you. I have heard that is very effective. And I have used variations of that when asking somebody to step up to a leadership role. I don't recall anybody using that precisely on me. So it may have been a variation too, by just saying, I believe you can do the job. Other comments? Go ahead, Arnie.
Can I add one more, sir, Mr. Hall? Matt Kinsky, the president of TI today, said, lead from the heart, not from the head. Does your heart decides your intelligence, or your intelligence decides your heart? Or does your intelligence decide your emotion, or your emotion decides your thinking in leadership? What do you think?
So I'm going to say that when he says be guided by your heart rather than your head, I'm going to say he's probably suggesting that we be guided by our passion, what we're passionate about, as opposed to our fears. Because most of the time, I think we associate our fears with our head. Now, in terms of does the heart guide emotions? I mean, emotions are a fickle thing. We need to learn to manage them and push through them. And by manage them, not let them control us. As a matter of fact, we can learn to control them. The body can't tell the difference between real laughter and fake laughter. The body, the endorphins that go into your bloodstream, if you just make yourself laugh for no reason at all, or if you're actually laughing because somebody amused you, your body doesn't know the difference. You can choose to summon up emotion when you need it. I do that when I'm speaking all the time. If I'm going to talk about being afraid, I summon up fear. I don't plan my body movements and facial expressions to look fearful. I just summon fear and my body does it. If I can do the same thing when I'm talking about love or hope or desperation. So I think the heart and the mind can control the emotion, and we need to manage it. And another person asked, do we ever get over the panic? You might get over the panic. If somebody asked me to take on a leadership role now, something I've done before, there's no panic involved because I've done it. It's when they ask me to take on something I haven't done before where there might be a moment of panic. but recognizing that the moment of panic is really your body saying, okay, I don't know what we're doing. And say, that's okay. We're going to figure it out. Thank you. Thank you for the information. I know you're worried, but we're going to figure it out. And that's part of managing your emotion.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, sir.
Okay. So one of the other questions I was planning on asking, and I think we have the time, correct me if I'm wrong, Ashvin.
Yes, you have 10 minutes.
Okay. Is there a leadership challenge in your life, a change you want to make that you'd like to take, a change you want to make that you'd like to take on? And what Toastmaster role or activity might help you prepare for it? So is there, go ahead, Teresa.
As you were discussing the last question, I realized I think there are certain times where I'm kind of leading, but I don't recognize it myself as leading, and that's when I'm in this sort of support role. But it's more like when I'm familiar with the systems of resources, the structure and the goal and what needs to be done. I'm really good at pulling all the group together. And I'm actually delegating without realizing I'm delegating and doing all the things I think other people recognize as leadership skills, but I just don't. So it occurred to me that I think in relation to the second question is like how, as we are trying to develop new leaders, and especially the next generation of people graduating and students and stuff, how can we bring out that idea more of that, like being a leader is not just doing this on your own, there is support. And I think in all your stories you talked about, we'll support you, we'll train you or whatever. Like what would you say really made that difference to sort of kind of ease that fear and really eventually give you all the experiences where now you don't panic as much anymore?
So the thing that has helped me most in my leadership experience is having mentors. And I'm going to say formal and informal mentors. So for instance, if you're an area director, your formal mentors are the division director and the club growth director and the program quality director and the district director. Mostly the division director and the district director. Those are your formal mentors. But that doesn't mean you can't have informal mentors. And informal mentors are all the other area directors around that you might know, or people have done it in the past. And when I was considering running for club growth director, program quality director, working my way up the chain, the first thing I did was I called 8 different people I know who have been district director, asked them about it, asked them about the process, asked them what value they got out of it, how they made it work. And then I looked for the people, the first role you have to play is club growth director. So then my next question is, who was really, really successful as club growth director? Who just blew that role out of the water? And that's the person I wanted to be my informal mentor. What's the difference between a formal mentor and an informal mentor? I have a very clear definition of that. A formal mentor is somebody who has the right to stick their nose in and ask you how you're doing, whether you want them to or not. An informal mentor is somebody who's going to wait for me to call them or wait for you to call them. But when you call, you can ask them questions about how to do stuff. Does that make sense? And I will have the role, whatever role you're choosing, will give you some formal mentors in Toastmasters. But there's a ton of informal mentors. Call them, reach out, ask for help. If you want to be an area director and you don't know how to do it, find somebody who, ask who was a really great area director, and ask them how they did it.
Yeah, that gave me an epiphany. Thank you. I like that insight from formal and informal mentor. Those who are supposed to kind of check up on you, and those who are there when you reach out to them.
Yep.
Thank you.
Arnie, question or comment?
Last question, sir, for you. I think the greatest challenge in terms of leadership, club leadership, is to acknowledge the guest, celebrate them, treat them like rock stars, don't ignore them, don't be arrogant, and don't treat them like dirt. I've seen this in many clubs, and if you don't do that, no amount of open houses, flyers, or public relation or marketing skill would do anything. Treat them like they're the most important characters in the world, and don't ignore and don't treat them like dirt.
I don't know if you saw my club marketing session a little bit ago, but yeah, I talk about treating the guest like royalty. But you want to treat the guest like royalty without coming across like a sycophant or seeming needy. So you want to treat them great, invite them to participate, give them information, ask for their impressions, but you don't want to come across as, oh, we need you to join, please join, because that will just drive people away. If they think that you need them to save your club, that's going to drive them away. You want to create the impression we're a healthy, thriving, vibrant club, and then ask them, would you like to join?
We have a question from a cell phone person.
Sure.
Raised her. I think it's from 510-644-1405.
Go ahead.
Mr. Nyhart from the Berkeley Club. And my question is, how do you say no? You spent a lot of time how to get to affirmation, but when it's necessary to say no, how can you say it? And the question is, when you want someone, how do you find that person with twin time, wealth, ability, interest, and knowledge?
Okay, so the first question is, how do you say no? And I can only tell you how I say no. Somebody calls me up and asks me if I want to get involved in something, perform some service. I evaluate it. Is it something I want to do? Is it something that excites me, or is it a burden? How much time is it going to take? How important is it to me or to the organizations I care about? And if it excites me, if it's something I would be energized by, and it's important, and it doesn't take a huge amount of time, okay, I'll say yes. Now, if let's say it doesn't excite me, it's not the right fit for me, or it's something I don't care about, I'll say no, and I'll try to say no very quickly. I'll usually say, hey, can I have 24 hours to consider this? I come back and say, I thought about it. This is not the right fit for me right now. And if I can suggest anybody else, I may do that. But I'll just tell them right out, no, thank you, but no, thank you. This is not the right fit for me right now. Of course, the other thing I get is I get invitations to come and do stuff, and it's like, and I look at my calendar, it's like, sorry, I'm booked. Now the other question is, how do you find somebody who can do the job? So you can ask them. So you look at the role you're trying to fill. What are the skills necessary? An easy example would be, hey, we're planning a conference. I want somebody to be the PR person, the marketing person for the conference. I need somebody with some marketing and PR experience. Now, maybe you know somebody. Great. If you do, you can ask them. But if you don't know anybody, now it's time to call those mentors that I just mentioned. Call the formal mentors and the informal mentors and say, hey, I'm looking for somebody who has marketing and PR experience, especially when it comes to events. I want somebody who can market this event and drive it. And you get 4 or 5 names from these people, and you start calling them. And you give them the ask, and you can tailor the ask. But the ask shouldn't be, hey, will you help us? The ask is, we have this problem. Mary recommended you. She thinks you'd be the perfect person to solve this problem. She told me a little about your skills. It sounds to me like you might have the skills we need to do this. Are you interested, willing, and available to be the PR chair for this event? But it's important that you let them know that the event's important and that their skills are a good match for it. That's part of every ask. If you don't do those things, somebody's just going to go, no. And I think we are out of time.
Absolutely, yes. And unfortunately, yes, we're out of time.
So let me sum up, if I may,
Absolutely.
Which is, we've been talking about the rubber meets the road. We've been talking about, are Toastmaster skills useful in real life? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They're 100% they are. I have yet to find a skill in Toastmasters that I haven't found an application for out in real life, even Robert's Rules of Order. If you want to grow your leadership skills so you can use them out in the real world, don't hesitate to look for a role in Toastmasters where you can practice it for free. You might as well learn it on somebody else's dime, with training, with mentoring, with support, where even if you fail, there are no negative consequences. So that's one of the wonderful things about Toastmasters is take on the role and try it. Even if you fail, there's no negative consequences. You can come back in a year or two and do it again and do it better. The first time I was president, I was a mediocre president, club president. I have since been president many times in many other clubs, and I do a better job, much better job. Perfect? No, still working on that. Think about how you react to being asked to be a leader. Those reactions aren't invalid, but they're one side of the equation. And we need to listen to that and listen to what's in it for me. If I take on this leadership role, what's in it for me? What skills will I be learning? What connections will I be making? How will I be helping the organization I care about? And then you can make your decision as to whether to step up or not. That's where the rubber meets the road. Asher.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And thank you for being here and giving us such a wealth of knowledge. I hope we could bring that to the real world going forward. If you receive value from Kyle's The Rubber Meets the Road session this morning, please share this information with your club. And click on the feedback survey, which I'm going to put in the chat right now. There you go. And fill out Kyle's short evaluative survey and help him make the workshop even better.